All right. Welcome, Richard. It's really great to have you at our Transformational Learning Summit. I'm excited to have a conversation with you.
I'm really grateful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and as I shared in our opening conversation before we hit record, I know that you're not kind of publicly known as a transformational learning guru, but I really felt called to reach out to you because I've been tracking your work for a while, and really the heart of what I perceive in your work is about bringing people together in meaningful ways, and what that means and what that looks like and the dynamics behind that. Um, for me, my definition of transformation is that it's something that becomes available in a space where people become deeply present to themselves and each other. And I'd love to start this conversation just by maybe coalescing around this understanding of transformation, because I know that's not a big, maybe like a word that's often used in your language, at least as far as I've read it. But I'd love to like open up with an exploration of maybe some common ground around
Mm,
this concept of transformation.
mm. Yeah. Just as you said that, this thing about being present with self and other, I just noticed my awareness doing all these things of like, okay, present with self, yes, here I am. Hi, this is me. Present with you, yes, okay. And then I heard some people in my house. I'm like, right, yeah, I'm in a physical place and there's people here. And then I thought, oh, the recording light is on in the Zoom, and so there's all these people. I don't know if there's 5 people or 500 people listening. Um, so yeah, there's that presence. The thing about awareness, what we're aware of, what we can pay attention to, and I guess the transformational learning type of stuff that I'm into, a lot of it comes down to how we orchestrate people's attention
Hmm.
and what kind of different possibilities open up depending on what we're paying attention to, and basically we can be more or less wholesome, more or less collaborative, more or less inclusive, and a lot of it just is like, what are we paying attention to? So if I'm excited personally, a big part of my work is about belonging and inclusion. And it's like, well, if we set that as one of our objectives, that we want to create a context where that just feels a lot more inclusive than other ones, just simply saying that that's what we're here for orchestrates people's attention in a way where there are certain things where, like, it's in some classes or at some events, you wouldn't necessarily be paying attention to the person who's kind of on the edge and you haven't heard from them. But if you say, hey, we're here to create inclusion, that sort of like um, coordinates people's attention in a way, and then shifts what we're capable of. I think, yeah, I don't usually talk about transformation. Um, and I think that might be because I'm so focused on the future state rather than the process of getting there. So, because for me, transformation is sort of like from here to there, and I'm just like so excited about there that
Hmm.
I like to inhabit this I don't know, some kind of like futuristic paradigm, some kind of reality where things are different. Um, and I get so enthusiastic about that future state that I don't need to necessarily describe the bridge to get there. Um, the kinds of spaces that I'm creating, I mentioned inclusion and belonging, that's a big part of it. And then I guess the other part is about how do we treat each other, and yeah, I'm really inspired by this. Well, one way to think about it is Riane Eisler's work around domination and partnership, and that domination is a paradigm that's very common in all kinds of groups where it's all about authority and hierarchy and control and power and domination and coercion, those kind of things. And then there's this other reality called the partnership paradigm, where we're meeting each other as equals, and they were equally um, dignified, we're equally human, we're equally valuable, we're equally entitled to respect and voice and all these kind of things. And that in that partnership paradigm, it just changes how we relate to each other, and how we share the space, and how decisions happen, and what leadership looks like. And so the kind of transformation I'm interested in is basically inhabiting a different reality where the default setting is we're coming together as partners, not in a relationship of domination and submission, but peer-to-peer equal partnership. And so the kinds of spaces that we design, the social experiences we design, they're just kind of like, hopefully it's like being transported into this other paradigm. And that's where the transformation happens, I guess, is by like putting people into the portal, where they're like, hey, we're in a new reality now, things are different here. There's some sort of subtle shifts about how the space is organized, how the agenda is organized. And hopefully that calls, it like evokes different parts of your personality, different skills, different affordances, different tendencies that you have kind of come online in a way in these different spaces. And at the end of the event, you look back and you're like, oh, this is what I'm capable of. You know, like this is who I would be if I wasn't constrained by, yeah, these hierarchical forces or dominating forces that I usually experience in my work or in other organizations that I've had to deal with. So that's I know a bit of a ramble, but I think, yeah, that's the transformation that I care about, is like creating a space where people can inhabit the future.
I love that, and I mean the way you phrase it, orchestrating awareness. For me, there's something also there in the like the difference between a structure of domination versus one of partnership is often the awareness of the dynamics of a situation that I wouldn't say always, but often just becoming aware of the implicit relationality in your situation helps you realize that this concept of domination doesn't necessarily make sense. You know, helps you might help you realize that your domination is actually a form of compensation for some sort of insecurity. And so there's something in the awareness-based aspect of it that actually can create the transformation towards partnership. And then the future aspect is also, it's really interesting for me to kind of hear that echo, because when we create a learning experience, for example, one of our patterns that we work with is called a conversation about the future. And it's really this idea that when you have people coming together from different walks of life with different, you know, agendas and motivations, one way to bring them together is to have a conversation about a future that matters to everybody, and to surface that as something that we can all live into. And then that creates kind of a context of cohesion for people to participate with each other. So I love these like I kind of suspected there was a lot of similarities and overlap in these worlds. So I'm curious about this space of when you're you know, looking to create this transformation in one way or another with a group of people, how you think about opening up that space of partnership or belonging. Like what does belonging mean to you?
The question. What it means to me personally, in July, I went to a gathering. It's called Jess Camp. It's really funny gathering. Really, I had the time of my life. And Jess Camp is a gathering of Twitter people. So I'm part of this like amorphous, unbounded, emergent network of people on Twitter who treat Twitter, the platform that some people think is just like this hellhole of political arguments and people being mean to each other. Me and my friends treat Twitter as a genuine place to socialize and to meet interesting people and have good conversations and make friends. And Jess Camp is one of the physical in-person events that we have as an opportunity for all of these digital connections to manifest in a physical space. So it was organized by Jess. That's why it's called Jess Camp. And she hired a hotel for a week in the south of Germany, and we put 75 people in there. And on the first night after the opening ceremony, I had a kind of conversation that I'd been longing for ages, and that was yeah, like a very recent memory of like, this is what it feels like to belong, where I'm excited about everyone that I'm going to meet. We have shared context, like, you know, the in jokes that I'm referencing, you understand, you've read some of the same books that I've read, you know, we've got some of the same cultural inheritance. Um, and there's if you even drop out of, you know, all those things I described are kind of these human things like culture. But if you just ignore even the human stuff and just go down the layer to the social, the animal layer, the mammal layer, um, belonging is when I'm in a group of people and I'm not vigilant. Like my nervous system is settled. Um, like we've just rescued this stray dog. It's been with us for the last 3 weeks, and she is incredibly anxious when she's by herself, and when she's like in the group and she knows her role in the group, she's completely settled and happy and focused. And I think people are just the same as the dog. You know, that like when we're in the right context, it's like I can let my guard down. I don't have to be second guessing everything. I don't have to be constantly on the lookout for like where's the next threat going to come from. I don't have to manage your perception of me. I can just be myself spontaneously. Um, my my capacities, like the things that I'm good at, kind of naturally come forth, and what the group needs and what I can contribute, the overlap between those two things just kind of naturally find each other. And when you have a critical mass of people that feel they belong, then the group turns into a superorganism, which it has a kind of coherent identity. It has a kind of collective intelligence. It has a, you know, you can say it has that, there's like a spirit of the group. Like you can, the group itself has a kind of personality. It seems to have almost like desires and wishes and memories and fears and things. And like, I think the experience of belonging is what it's like to be an individual that's enrolled into the superorganism, and you become, you know, like the liver belongs to my body, you know, like that's the same way that I can belong in a group. It's like I'm a limb, I'm an organ, I've got some kind of participation in a greater whole.
Almost feels like you're being used by that greater whole, like in a good way, like, you know, in the way
Yeah.
that the liver is used by the body, you know, it has a distinct sense of purpose. Makes me think, I'm a long time burner. I go to Burning Man my 14th year. And that's what you just described is exactly how I feel when I'm in that context. I just feel like I'm part of the furniture, like I belong. You know, there's nothing that's out of place for me. Do you think it's possible to create that in the context of a learning experience?
Yes, I think the learning experience can be a lot of different things. So short answer is yes. Um, Slightly longer answer is you can kind of uh, there's such a broad array of what you can get a group to do. Um, that as soon as you set your intention, like if you say that we've got a group and we really want to prioritize belonging, once you set that intention, there's like 100 opportunities that you have for designing small tactics that add up to that big intention. So like, you know, some of the events we'd run, if they're physical events, the first thing that happens when you arrive is we're going to take your photo with a Polaroid, and you've got a chance to write a few words about yourself, and we call it offline social media. You know, so you make yourself like a little profile card, and then there's a wall with everyone's photos and their sort of keywords, the topics that they like to talk about, or the things that you can ask them about, and that's a you know, in the course of a retreat or something, that's a 2-minute interaction um, that goes a long way to giving people handholds or like surface area to create belonging around. Um, and and when you have that design goal of we're here to produce belonging, yeah, you can just design a lot. You can literally design 100 of those little micro moments into the group process to maximize the chances of people finding each other and making those wholesome bonds with each other. Um, you mentioned Burning Man, anywhere where there's like physical stuff to do, whether that's like building a camp or feeding people or like moving furniture around, gardening, like if there's practical stuff to do, that's a very, very efficient way to help people find their role in the, help them kind of usher them along their participation in the greater whole. I think,
That's,
yeah, I think
I
I think
think
there's
that's
a million options.
such a key point is that one of the ways belonging emerges is when you feel like you're making a meaningful contribution in a
Hmm.
group of a context, in the
Hmm.
context of a group. And I guess it brings up this question for me. So in the context of a digital space, a digital, particularly like if you're convening some kind of community learning effort or something like that, and I'd love to explore some of your experience with some of the courses that you've been teaching online. Um, any thoughts on what that might look like there, and
Hmm.
on ways that you create belonging in that context?
Hmm. Yeah, I think it really it depends on how you think about learning and pedagogy uh, and education in general. Like how do you conceptualize your role as a educator or a learning facilitator or whatever your label is for the role that you're playing? There's a kind of, I think, quite a limited paradigm of I'm a teacher and I have a, a bucket full of knowledge and my job is to like pour it into these empty vessels, which are my students. And it's obviously like kind of an outdated way to think, I think. Um, and then there's another mode, which is like I'm saying, yeah, a learning facilitator or a coach or something where the job is about um, activating the intuitive, spontaneous, non-coercive, emergent capacity that every living being has for learning because we're part of an evolutionary system. And that's just one of the main operating principles of not just this planet, but the whole universe is that like we're constantly in this process of updating. And if you see your role as like helping the feedback loops along rather than being a repository of all the knowledge that you need to transfer to someone, um, then yeah, you can design for that. So I mean, in really practical terms, in the digital space, this sounds very mundane maybe, but we use a lot of breakout groups. I think that's a big part of it is like, and this translates across to physical events as well, but like really designing for small scale encounters. Like if you're with physically or digitally, like if you're with 30 people, when you first meet them, 30 people is like it's kind of intimidating or like maybe you're an extremely extroverted sort of charming charismatic person and you like work the room or something, but most people are not going to feel at ease with 30 strangers. And so when we're running our online courses right from the start and repeatedly through every session, there's going to be loads of breakout groups where, well, there's time on your own just to think and to reflect and to sort of like tune in with the what are we here to do and what are your questions. And there's time in groups of two and groups of three and groups of four where you've got just a lot more opportunity to think on your feet and process out loud. And um, when there's not so many people around, you're less self-conscious about, oh, I've got to be a certain way, I've got to meet a certain standard, I don't want to waste people's time. Like if you're just in a small breakout with two or three people, most people feel it's a lot easier for most people to feel relaxed and like they can just be themselves. So there's a load of that. And I guess implicit in the breakout room thing, it's not just about putting people in small groups, but giving them suggestions about how to spend their time, like kind of giving a choreography. So if you see the way that we design our online courses, it's like a minute by minute choreography of kind of like maximizing the opportunities for people to encounter each other in a useful way. So that means here's some really good questions that we know you should talk about, but also here are some facilitated processes that we know are going to nudge you out of your habitual ways of communicating with each other and inhabit a different way of being. So, for example, if we're going to do a session where you're in a small group for 20 minutes and you're going to talk about someone's real challenge and your job is to support this person as they're working through some kind of problem, you can tell them, don't give advice. That's the one rule. You're not going to give advice. You're just going to ask questions, something like that, like just any kind of small, simple framing, again, to orchestrate people's attention, like to say, you might naturally have this impulse to say, you know what you should do? Just don't do that. we can kind of like interrupt people's habits, and as soon as your habits are interrupted, there's all this extra space opens up. Instead of me just doing the thing that I know how to do, if I temporarily disable that option, there's just like this infinite array of different options that happen. And back to the question of belonging, I think if people are engaging in experimental behaviors, like if they're like temporarily inhabiting a role or like trying a different being, that's a pretty quick way for people to feel connected with each other, like it builds a real sense of trust and intimacy.
How do you think about this concept of creating a container?
Yeah,
Not
great
just in the
question.
context of a learning experience. I mean, I just assume anytime you bring people together, facilitators throw this word around, create a container. And I
Yeah.
always like to think about that a little more deeply, like what exactly is a container? I'm curious to hear what your reflection on that is.
Yeah, it's one of those really annoying facilitator words, right? Like that facilitators say, and they all know well, you think they know what they're talking about. But if you're not in the loop, it's just like, what are you talking about? For me, a container is like a bounded context. And so like this house that we're in is a container. My wife and I have taken the rental for 3 months on a large house in the south of Spain. And so that 3-month period has a kind of overarching intention or a purpose, and it has some physical constraints. We've got 10 bedrooms, there's like these kind of things that are fixed. There's things that you can do here and things that you can't do here. And then containers are kind of nested inside of each other too. So you can go on the bigger scale. This house is held by my relationship with my wife Nati. Like that, our relationship is kind of like bigger than the house, and there's something about the way that we treat each other which is infusing this space with a certain set of values and practices. And you can go bigger. You can look at like, we're in Spain. What is Spain? What there's you can keep going outwards until you get to the whole the parliament of all beings, or you can go in. And so like at the smaller scale, we have events here. An event might be 4 days long and has 20 people, and it'll have some shaping invitation or purpose, or like, why are we here? How did you get here? Like, what was the question that invited you in, that sort of like compelled you to act? I think that invitation question, that orientation question, is part of the container. And when you bring a new configuration of people together, there is inevitably some, whether or not you mark it, there is some kind of threshold that we cross together. There's some kind of collective initiation, or like, yeah, I would usually do like an actual opening ritual, but even if you don't do that, we inherently are building something together. And that moment of initiation, the moment of welcoming, the moment of like opening, really sets a lot of the constraints about what's going to happen for the duration of the event. And so it's almost like, I think about like the first words that you say at a new event, at a new gathering of people, they're kind of like a magic spell. They have this like tremendous influence on what's going to happen. And so like, as a facilitator or a container designer, I'm trying to set up that first encounter for people so that they're like biased in a useful direction. So we might get them to think about what they love, or to talk about their sense of purpose in the world, or to connect with something wholesome and purposeful, and get people to connect over that, or to connect over our shared intentions for how we want to treat each other, or there's a million different ways to do this, but the container for me is like, it's temporary, it's bounded, it has an in and it has an out. It's a limit. It's a definition. It's the in and out thing, like the outside of this event or outside of this house, there's all of the complexities of the world and all of the disappointments of the world. And inside of this event, there's a opportunity to do something differently. We can inhabit a different reality. I think this is a big part of the appeal of Burning Man. I've never been, but I've been to similar events. Like that we're going to role play what it would be like to live in the world, the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, and you can do that inside of a container and like a defined experimental period that's like in a frame. It's a lot easier to do that for 4 days than it is to say, oh, I'm going to live as if, fill in your own version. I'm going to live as if capitalism doesn't exist, or I'm going to live beyond patriarchy. Like, you can try, but I think the container gives you a more focused, we're going to do it for 4 days. Okay, I can actually give you a lot more concerted effort on that mission when it's in a defined period. And then, of course, at the end, you've got this particular opportunities for things that you can do at the end of a container that you can't do at the start. So, for example, let's stop and reflect on what's different now. How have I changed? What am I committing to? Like, if you can get people to verbalize a commitment in view of peers that they trust, like, that's a very transformative opportunity, right? Like, I'm going to stop doing this. I'm going to start doing this. Like, when you name that at the end of an event, like, that really goes deep. It really like kicks into some deep archetypal process. And of course, you can also just reflect and say, what did we learn as a group? What was great about this experience? What was crap about this experience? What would we do differently? So yeah, as you can hear, I've got a lot to say on the topic. It's like this very simple thing of a container, which I think of as like a, like a Tupperware or something, like just a simple, it's a box or it's a cup or something. Yeah, so much of my craft is like, how do you make a good one of those?
I love that, so I have a very particular definition of a container that's kind of emerged for me from my work, and I love the depth and broad range of what you just shared. So my definition is that in some ways the container is the sum of how people feel in the space, and what I mean by that is I once heard someone responded to me. It was like, what did she say? Forget, but she challenged my definition because she was like, oh, a container doesn't have to be about people feeling good. It means that people have to participate in a particular way. And my response was like, however people participate is how they feel called to participate. If someone is sharing, even when they feel uncomfortable or challenged to do so, then that's a container that elicits that kind of behavior. And as that person does so, it models that desired type of behavior to other people. So in a way, when you see people show, like, I can bring a group of people together and say, hey, this is how the container works. And if nobody steps into that, then I may have articulated the boundaries of that container, but it's essentially meaningless. The container only takes on meaning when people actually step into the expression of it. And that is what I mean by this sum of how people feel in the space. And it's, in some ways, it kind of dovetails for me with this concept of belonging and contribution that we talked about, because there's like, that's like the first parameter of what does it mean to belong in this space. And then the making of that space is this kind of participatory of me as a participant showing up in this way, like sharing vulnerably, even when I feel scared to do so, models for other people, and then creates this kind of deepening context for everyone to step into that, to then build like a certain kind of energy in the space.
This just makes me think about a kind of, I guess, like a made up framework that I use sometimes, which is, you could think of as like a different way of breaking down what a container is. So I think about content, choreography, and character. So content is the thing that I put on the poster that convinces people to come to my event. So it's a decision-making workshop, and you're going to learn about decision-making. And when people are thinking about where should I spend my money or where should I spend my time, they're thinking about the content, and that's the decisive factor. Is like, do I care about decisions? No. Okay, well, that's not for me. Or like, it's about conflict, whatever is the thing. And over the years, I got, in a way, it's sort of like there's stuff that's happening beneath the content that to me is much more influential than anything. These layers sort of sit underneath each other. So then I have the choreography layer, which is like, it doesn't matter what the topic is, whether we're talking about decision making or French cooking. If I choreograph the event in a certain way, I can either, like, for example, I can design it for connection. I can set these moments in the agenda, these kind of group dynamics where, like I said, about putting people in small groups, or proposing certain kinds of conversations or games or experiments to try. Like, that choreography is going to determine a huge amount of like what happens there, regardless of what the content is. You can kind of like switch different content, and if your choreography is designed for belonging, then you'll produce belonging. But then there's another layer below that, which is like, it's not enough for me to be a kind of robot that's like executing on my plan. Like, oh, it's 5:37 and we said at 5:37 we're going to move to the point where everyone's, connecting with each other. And it's like, if you take that robotic attitude, you're not actually going to produce the outcomes that you want. I think the layer that lives below the choreography is the character, meaning how, as a host, as someone who's inviting people in, as a facilitator or a teacher, whatever that role is, who am I? How am I? Like, what am I modeling into the room? Like, am I a wholesome, decent, grown-up, relaxed, engaged person? Or am I distracted, not really present, agitated, operating out of a sort of like shadow, like just trying to get attention and make sure that everyone loves me? Like, the quality of the character, like, what is it like to be me, is going to have a huge determining factor on how the choreography plays, which is going to determine whether or not the content actually lands and if people are going to connect with each other. So it's like this, like, progressively getting more and more invisible, I think, and more influential on what happens, to the point now where I feel like, I say, sufficiently advanced facilitation is indistinguishable from hanging out, meaning you can remove the content and you can remove the choreography and just hang out. Like, you can just be together in a certain way, and that can be more impactful, more transformative than any like workshop or any like structured agenda, if you can inhabit that way of being in a stable way.
I think there's so much to what you're saying, both in terms of hanging out a way of being, but before we get to that, I want to touch on maybe a concept that I would refer to as flavor. This is like, what is your flavor of holding space as a space holder? Because this is so foundational to belonging. Like, you might have two people that are, teaching or holding space around the same thing. Let's say mindfulness. One person is super disciplined and kind of rigid about mindfulness, and another person is just super chill and relaxed. The content is basically the same. Choreography is like a little bit different. The flavor character is totally different. And for one person as a participant in one space, you're going to be like, I have found my man, because I am so rigid, and mindfulness for me is like this, that. And then in another space, it's like, wow, like, I feel so at home because I can relax and just be myself. And I don't think one or the other is better or worse. I just think the challenge is when the space holder isn't aware of their flavor. That's the difference, is like, because then especially kind of where you are with yourself, you're either like, oh, there's something wrong with me, or why aren't people listening to me, right? And the difference is just knowing, like, this is what I'm at, this is what I'm like, this is my character, this is the flavor that I put into the space, and it's not for everyone, but for the people that it is for, they're going to love it.
Yeah, this is, as before we pressed record, that's what I was trying to get at when I said personal development happens spontaneously in the right social context. And what I mean is, like, if you pay attention to the context, like, what flavor do you need? What kind of leadership do you need to emulate? Or like, what are the traits that other people have that you want to embody? And when you have that social context with those people demonstrating those traits, you are spontaneously going to emulate them. Like, if you're like, a more common, perhaps like a more common model of personal development is this, like, I've got to try really hard and I've got to discipline and focus, and I'm gonna, it's this like personal quest of like trying to install new skills or new information or new behaviors in me, or like reformat my beliefs or something like that. And it's a very individualized process. Whereas what I'm describing is like, just get the right companions, focus on getting the right people around you and the right quality of encounter. and all of that development just happens spontaneously. I think that's how humans learn. I think that's how mammals learn. I think it's just intuitive. It's part of our evolutionary inheritance. I think it's like I mentioned my dog outside. I think this is just how the natural way to learn is like the way the dog learned was by being around other dogs. That she's a hunting dog, and so she's learned how to hunt because she was following what the other dogs were doing. And that to me just feels so much more straightforward and effortless than this like I must do it myself. I must consume the knowledge. And that's what we're trying to design for, is like the right social context where your development happens spontaneously.
It's a little bit of both, though, and I would think. I mean, in the sense of, I don't know about you as a human being, as an entrepreneur, but I know that for myself, and this is something that's been very present for me recently. Like creating something, bringing something into the world has often involved a certain amount of effort and struggle, and through that effort and struggle, I've grown a lot. And at the same time, the spaces I've been in have really supported me in that process. So I'm just curious on your reflection here around that territory between something that is very individual, like your individual will and what is important to you enough to struggle for, and then what you're talking about as a kind of a group coherence state.
Yeah, it might be a stage thing, right? Like I think people, I spend time with people who really need more individuation, like that they need to cross some threshold into independence and autonomy and self-responsibility. And there's definitely that whole, it's like maybe it's that one side of my body or something is this individuation side, this need for boundaries and sovereignty, and like I can do it, like you're saying, will, like this is these are my boundaries, like this is my contribution, this is my preferences, this is what I can offer. And I wouldn't want anyone to skip that chapter, like it seems like a really crucial piece that people can inhabit that autonomy. And what I'm talking about, I think, is I guess I'm somewhat in reaction against something that I feel is imbalanced, which is this excessive focus on the individual. Because what I'm describing as autonomy, or this like boundaries and so on, this individual thing, the individual is only a temporary abstraction, and the actual concrete material reality of being a body in space is that you're in relationship. That's the background state. From the moment your consciousness was first stuck into a body until the moment it leaves, you're constantly in relationship, and you don't get to switch that off, and so like when I say I'm like reacting against something, it feels like there's a really strong bias towards treating people as if they are genuinely individuals, instead of an individual being a helpful shortcut, a little abstraction that we use. It's kind of a joke that we play on each other from some time to time. We're like, oh yeah, you're a separate self. I'm a separate self too. Wink, wink. I feel like it's very easy to get carried away with that, and get focused on this very individualistic pursuit of like, if I can just consume more skills, knowledges, belief, so on, then I'm going to be this complete person, and then I'll find satisfaction. Where I'm like, it's been my experience that once you've attained a certain level of individuation, then the job is really about, how do I relate with other people? How do I contribute? What's my role to play in the larger system that's beyond me? And that shifting my attention off the individual into the relationship seems to be one of the main educational paths for me. And I'm assuming, I hope it's not just me, I hope there's other people that are on a similar quest.
I think this is one of the primary possibilities of a group space, is to recognize that, because the world isn't always built in a way that is conducive to the realization of that at the depth that it's possible to realize that this thing that I call I has only ever existed in relationship. And to be able to kind of have the safety to discover that and explore that, I feel like that's, whether it's a community space or, and a lot of my work is revolved around that possibility in the context of a learning experience that becomes a community space. But yeah, I'd love to hear your reflections on maybe how you help people to recognize that somehow or discover it.
Yeah. It's a fun question. I think it feels like one of these things where there's one mountain, but there's many different routes up the mountain, right? So I guess one of the first ways that I learned, or yeah, let's think about it as a transformational experience, like the transformation from, oh, I'm a separate self to I'm actually part of something. I think a lot of that for me came through music, where, and not just music, but improvised music, especially, where there's like a minimal set, there's a minimum viable consensus. We're playing the blues in E, something like that. Yeah, there's some, well, we're inhabiting a handful of norms about how Western music should sound. We've all agreed that we're all going to be tuned to 440 hertz or something, like there's a little bit of agreement, and then there's just a tremendous amount of exploration and willingness to try stuff out and to do your thing in attunement with other people, to be listening more than you're speaking or more than you're playing. And that's a very common kind of everyday experience for a lot of people, that they get to inhabit that reality. And yeah, it's obvious to me as a musician that what's good about that is not me. Like I'm not the main event there, and none of the individuals that are playing that music are the main event, but it's actually the sum total. It's like this emergent next order thing that happens when you get people coordinating in this way. That's the magic. And you can't take the 4 members of the Beatles and put them in different studios and expect them to just, well, you could make albums 4 times faster. You can all be recording simultaneously. It's going to be crap, right? Like, what's good about it is the thing that emerges. So that was my first way in. And then after that, the next way in was very deliberate, facilitated consensus decision-making and deliberation. So the kind of group process where you sit in a circle, you expect to be there for a long time, and everyone's voice matters. And the job is really like, we're trying to build a shared understanding of a specific topic. So let's say it's this house, and I don't know, how are we looking after the cleanliness of this house? If we were to decide to make that decision by consensus, for me, the job is really, I'm going to listen to everyone and understand how they see the world, and build a 360-degree picture, literally 360-degree, because you've got people sitting in a circle and each voice adds something different. And when we're talking about, is the kitchen clean enough? We can dig in underneath that specific position of like, yes, I think it's clean. No, I don't think it's good enough. To what are the underlying principles behind someone's position, and say, why do you feel that way, or what's at stake for you, or what other stories do you have? You can through such a mundane thing like the kitchen, you can just drag in all of this history and context and feeling and psychology. All the stuff sort of arrives, and then to make a consensus decision where your job is to try and present a proposal that genuinely respects everyone in the room, where you're not trying to be the individual who's so clever or is so domineering or is so willing to just like assert himself in front of the room, but you're trying to name something that you believe that everyone could love. Like that process, for me, when I started doing that in my late 20s, it really just showed me that my perspective is always limited, extremely limited, and necessary. Like I've got a useful role to play, but it's like one slice of the pie, And if I want to understand something thoroughly, I need to get lots of different perspectives, and we can start to assemble this 360 view. And that was a really direct way and a very practical way, I think, to inhabit this collective identity, to see like a superorganism, by using my empathy to walk around the circle and see what would this person think about. I talked about the dishes, which is a very low stakes example, but what if we're talking about people's sense of safety or conflict, or like these things that are really weighty? That really helped me a lot to inhabit a collective identity. And the more time I've spent in that kind of way of thinking, the more, I think, the more mature I've become, the more compassionate I've become, the more wholesome I've become, and obviously for other people, they have kids, and that's the straightforward way to do it. You just, I don't have kids, so I haven't gone down that path, but I know that like bringing another life into this world and like having that responsibility for the other does a major sort of reformat on your sense of identity. We probably can't in our workshops like orchestrate for everyone to have kids, but the collective decision making thing is a pretty
That's a
effective
different kind of
technique. Yeah.
workshop.
And I mentioned consensus, but I definitely don't want to leave people with the impression that I think consensus is the right tool for every job. But it's more about having deliberate, facilitated collective processes that have an objective that everyone has skin in the game, they really care about. So, a lot of our events will have an agenda that's assembled. It's co-created by all the participants, not through consensus, but with something like unconferencing or open space technology, where it's about people just following what they're excited about, and we build this kind of like patchwork of what people are into. And again, if you do that a couple of times, people tend to go through a process of like, I'm an individual, I care about this thing, I'm going to do this. And then over time they start to realize like there's a next order of scale, there's a next order of coordination going on that's actually much more interesting than anything that I've got going on for myself. And it's that participation in the larger whole that's inspiring and renewing, and like that's where all the goodness is. And yeah, I get really excited about it. I love inviting people into that collective experience.
Mm. And it's like a felt experience. It's not just it's like you feel the energy of it. It's hard to describe. You used the
Mhm.
word attunement earlier, and I'm curious what that word means to you.
Thank you for asking. Um, I often rely on a musical metaphor, and because I think music is kind of oldest and most advanced form of coordination that humans have widespread.
Mm.
Um, and so maybe this is a sideways way to answer, but like I'm very fond of this concept of harmony. And if you're from the West and you're not a musician, if I say harmony, people often think I mean unity, or like when I say harmony,
Rainbows
they
and
think,
unicorns.
yeah, or like the absence of disturbance, right? Like that harmony is
Mm.
this kind of like everything's the same and there's no tension. Whereas as a musician, I think of harmony being difference. Like you need to be playing different roles, and if you're going to, you're at a barbershop quartet or something, the four part harmony, you're all singing different notes, but it's difference with attunement. So you're
Mm.
doing your thing and you're paying attention to what everyone else is doing, and you're making subtle adjustments to what you're doing in response to what they're doing until you find a harmonious relationship. So it's not random difference. It's not just everyone doing the thing that they care about. It's you're doing your difference and you're paying attention to what the other person is doing, and it's so attunement is like calibration.
Mm.
It's the fine adjustment, where when I have people in a space, I mostly want them to be themselves, like as if that's a thing that you can be. But anyway, uh, follow what's most alive for you, like lean in the direction that just be the organ that you are, but don't be ignorant about the other people around you. Just pay attention, like and to be attuned is to just alter your posture by 5 degrees to be more welcoming of the other person that's next to you,
Mm.
instead of like being here, I'm just over here, which means there's an opportunity for you to join the conversation.
Mm.
um it's just like a quality of noticing what's going on around you, and a way of prioritizing other people's experience as well as your own, and
Mm.
a kind of art of consideration.
I think, and I think this idea of attunement also has so much depth to it. On from the depth to noticing what's happening around you to the depth of noticing what's happening inside you. Like for me, the definition of attunement I always work with, I'm very much inspired by Thomas Hubel, which is the embodied capacity to sense and feel another person or a situation. And as I've been unpacking my inquiry into this capacity, and in some ways, attunement is also like a certain quality of internal emptiness, that I can really be with you, right? Because to really sense and feel you, and I kind of need to not be with my thoughts and everything going on internally. I need to have enough spaciousness to really be with you, and that same spaciousness allows me to notice what in the environment may or may not be like conducive to your safety, your feeling of safety and comfort, and like being able to relax in a space. But as you were just sharing, I was really thinking about like the harmony of my emptiness where you show up fully in my space, and your emptiness where I show up fully in your space. It's not a loss of individuation. It's just kind of like a flipping the script on the individuation where you get to fully reflect me and I get to fully reflect you. And somehow that actually like really, really works well.
I love it. Yeah. I guess my where I'm at in my life, I guess I'm emptiness is new for me. I'm much more of a I play lead guitar, I play the solo. And I'm learning how to play the space between the notes. That's definitely like my developmental edge. So I kind of get what you're talking about. And I kind of get with Hubel as well. I'm like, I think I know, I kind of recognize the direction that he's pointing in, but it's definitely not my strong suit yet.
So one thing that's present for me in the conversation that we've had over the last few minutes around like attunement and this stuff, and particularly when you brought in the music metaphor of a group of people, is I guess what I would call collective intelligence. And I'm curious a little bit to hear about your reflections on first on what that means, because I also think that might be one of those terms that people throw a lot around without necessarily having a standardized definition. And then also how some of these things of belonging and attunement, because, just to situate this back in the context of the conversation around learning and transformational learning. For me, one of the transformations in this understanding of what we're talking about is that you're not just talking about, here I am, the subject matter expert, like you said, pouring this content into, all these empty student heads, but actually that we're learning together, that there's opportunity for some kind of collective intelligence that becomes more available through sense of safety, belonging, attunement. And I'd love to hear some reflections on that.
I guess the first assumption I have is that a well-tuned group has capacities that exceed what any individual can have. And I say that's an assumption because for a lot of people that's not obviously true. A lot of people haven't had loads of marvelous experiences with groups. They often find groups to be kind of irritating and clumsy and stupid and disappointing in lots of ways. So to say that a group can be more intelligent than any individual, that's a contentious statement, but it's certainly been my experience. The most recent example I have of that is actually I have been doing a little bit of emptiness practice. I'm proud of myself. The last event that I hosted in November was very, very, very open-ended about how the agenda was going to be structured, what content was going to go into the agenda. Like I left it really wide open. And I'm a subject matter expert in the sense that I've spent the last 12 years really with obsessive attention and doing everything I can to just commit myself to the learning process. Like, how do you make really satisfying group experiences? And so I know that there's things, like I described, there's things you can do at the opening. There's things, that there's going to be a kind of like halfway through or 2/3 of the way through, there's a kind of opportunity for a peak experience of connection and vulnerability. And like, I can use my individual intelligence to kind of map out an arc that I want to take the group on and to design specific choreography or tactics to take us through there. But for this last event that I did in November, I wanted to practice emptiness. I was just like, I'm just going to leave as much as possible up for grabs. And it was so gratifying for me to see in the 20 people we had in this gathering, people just showed up with what I felt was exactly what was needed for the group. So at the start, someone proposed some exercises around connection and getting to know each other. It's like, yeah, that's what's needed, and I could have told you that beforehand, but feeling that just emerged spontaneously from the people in the room. And then, like I said about this peak experience, instead of me designing like, oh, on Thursday afternoon at 7 p.m., we're going to do this thing and it's going to be really, like I can get into my engineering mindset and try and design everything. But instead, what happened was just organically someone proposed a poetry circle, and then that poetry circle evolved into like sharing music, and it was incredibly deep and moving and powerful, and so much more. It was better than anything I could have designed because it was happening spontaneously. It was responsive to the people in the room. Many of the people felt they had permission to co-create and shape it. It wasn't my thing. It wasn't like, hi, I'm an expert, come to my show, here's the performance, you're a passive consumer. It was assembled by the people in the room. And so I felt like that the arc of the whole event, like there were these points that outperformed what I could do as an expert, and had so much more capacity, for all the things that I didn't see. There's like all these parallel tracks of activities and experiences that I had no visibility into. Yeah, I think a humming group. The reason my consulting company is called The Hum. It's like when that team's really humming, it's just like I say, it's just got much more capacity than an individual does. Even a very talented, very passionate individual. So I think that's the main thing I have in mind when I'm talking about collective intelligence. It's that there's this extra superhuman capacity that is actually beyond what an individual can do. So like if you get 8 people in the room and you really get them sharing deeply about how they feel about money or gender or spirituality or something like that, I don't believe that you can get a single individual that can inhabit the perspectives of 8 people fully on a subject of that complexity and depth. You just can't. Like there's just too much nuance. Like my thoughts on gender or about money are just so contextual and entangled in my autobiography and my embodied reality of like how I grew up and what experiences I've had. I can barely understand it, let alone getting 8 people together. It's like there's no way to really compress that effectively into a summary that can do it justice. And that's why we have collective intelligence. Like we have the group can just be the group. We don't need one person to like erase make this kind of artificial, constrained, compressed version of reality. Like we can just have the full capacities of the group activated and ready to deploy. So does that answer your question? I feel like it's like an infinitely large one that I haven't given that much thought before into how to pin it down.
Yeah, I think it's an emergent territory, and also what you're sharing there around that one person can't possibly encapsulate the understood perspective of all these people around a subject matter. I think this is really at the heart of a well-designed cohort-based learning experience, that it's not just one person sharing their understanding, but it's fundamentally a conversational process. And that's where I would imagine it really dovetails with any kind of community-based process. I mean, I wonder your reflections on this, because you're situated in a world where I have a lot less experience around decentralized decision-making and stuff like that. But I would imagine that one of the foundations of that process is, how are we going to communicate and learn together from the things that we do, the decisions that we make? How are we going to learn how to even be together? And to me, that's the building block of any transformational experience, any kind of learning experience, is that it's not just about the content that you're learning. It's really the learning of how to be together and how you're going to like navigate that relational space. And the conversational nature of that process.
Yeah, that I briefly mentioned my wife Nati, who I get to work a lot with, and one of the conversations that she loves to host with groups, which I've seen is really powerful, can be really transformative, is she calls it "How do we want to be together?" Which is exactly what you're describing. Like,
right.
it's actually one way to do it is to get people to inhabit in their imagination what an awesome group can feel like. And maybe you've got memories. Some people don't even have memories of it, but like you can at least assemble it from a fictional imagination. Like, what does an awesome group feel like? And kind of figure that out for yourself. And then collectively we start to describe each of us what makes an awesome group. How do we want to be together? Like, how do we want to treat each other? And you can progressively get into more and more detail. Like, what do we want to do around conflict, or like when we have some kind of coordinating infrastructure, how much buy-in do we expect? How much consensus do we expect? Like, is everyone supposed to go to every meeting, or can we, there's these like kind of fine-grained questions. I think just that process of naming how we want to be together already is like quite a transformative opportunity, because it's like, this idea of the fish who doesn't know they're swimming in water. Like, by saying how do we want to be together, you're drawing attention to all of this invisible shared infrastructure that governs our interactions, and saying, hey, this exists, it's real, and actually it's up for grabs. We can change it. And especially the first couple of times you do that, like, a lot of people haven't spent much time in groups that have explicit norms where we're prototyping different ways of relating. Again, this is one of the things that people find very exciting about Burning Man, is like, there's a different set of rules for how we're going to interact here. Like, there's different expectations, even at the very base level of like expectations of physical affection or eye contact, or like what kind of things you're allowed to talk about, or how I disagree with you. Like, there's all these differences that you encounter, and making that explicit, it's kind of psychedelic. It's like all of this stuff that I took for granted about how reality is, suddenly realize that, wow, that's not reality. That's just like an artificial construction that we've made, and we can make it differently. We can unmake it and make it differently. And so I guess that's the other half of the process that I'm excited about, to complete the learning loop, is like, okay, we have this conversation about how we want to be together, and start like naming our highest ideals about how we want to be. But then once we've spent a bit of time together, we stop and reflect, and we say, do we measure up? We never get it perfect. And so it's like, where's the gap between our aspirations and our reality? And what do we want to do about that gap? Like, can we propose new experiments, or like, do we just need to talk about it more? Or can we try a different group process that will get to a different outcome? Or do we just need to hear that some people have some grievances and disappointments, and once they've got that off their chest, then they're going to be relaxed? Like, this, for me, that you've got to have both halves of that loop. That there's the projection of the future of like, what do we want to be? How do we want to be? And then the stop and look back at like, how are we doing? And if you can maintain that as a habitual loop, like that loop for me is the beating heart of collective intelligence. It is the beating heart of evolution. Like, that is how we make continuous adjustments and improvements, and like stay on a path of like increasing wholesomeness, increasing capacity, increasing intelligence. Like, yeah, I love that. It's really fun to be an organ in that system.
And it's this conversation is really crystallizing for me this insight that just clearly and collectively defining a context in that way, like the rules that are going to govern how we're going to be together. Like when you said Burning Man, I was like, that's right. It's its own rule set. It's a pocket of rules that are radically different than the rules in the rest of the world for a moment in time. And stepping into those rules, into those norms for that window of time is transformational, because I get to try to be a completely different way, and and then discover whatever I discover in that process. And I think that, like, in some ways, Burning Man is an extreme example, but in some ways, anytime you intentionally decide to bring together a group of people for a community or a learning experience, there's an opportunity to do that and to collectively create a set of rules and norms, expectations. They're going to shape the way that you show up with each other, that can offer this opportunity for transformation.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I think literally every group is a new opportunity like that. And it can be as simple as, going to the supermarket and you can set your intention about how I'm going to interact with the people in the supermarket. I think it's kind of limitless opportunities for doing this kind of transformational work. And I guess that's why I get so much energy out of it, is because there's so many opportunities for shaping the course of our collective evolution, just by changing what we're paying attention to. Just like what we invite from people, like I think most people spend most of the time not being consciously aware of the norms that they're operating inside of. And so, like, when you get to change that and say, hey, do you want to change it as well? Like, you're an empowered, active, equal participant here. You can shape the rules just like I shape the rules. Yeah, that's tremendously exciting.
Yeah, it just brings back that we actually lost the thread on one of our conversations, which was when you said content. What was the middle one?
Choreography
And character. And then you said that at some point, hanging out is all you need. But there's something about spaces of being, spaces where you get to just hang out, but really just be in a particular way that really resonates with you, that energizes you, that that somehow connects with a deep sense of purpose, that offers this this refuge, or this, whatever it is that kind of supports your humanity and offers transformation. And I think that really lands in this territory that we're talking about.
And it kind of, as a facilitator, as a teacher, as a leader, it kind of makes the job easier for me when I think that, like, a big part of what I have to contribute is a kind of calm, settled nervous system. It's not about how awesome my thoughts are, a lot of it is just showing up, being relaxed, like that, which is, it's easy for me to be relaxed. It's something that, like, I can contribute without really having to try for it. And it's a really significant building block on someone's process of being able to learn, is that people learn better when they're surrounded by people that are calm, that they're not getting these signals saying you should be on edge, you should be alert. These temporary moments of stress are good for learning, but basically you want to be in a background context where you're safe and relaxed and socially engaged. Like, that's how people learn. It really takes the load off for me. It's like, oh yeah, I can do that all day.
So maybe we wrap up here soon, and one final reflection on anything you've noticed as far as differences between doing this kind of work online versus in person.
Every time I've answered that question, I feel like I'm in a different place with it. Like, there was a really amazing moment when everyone was forced into lockdown, and almost everyone in the world kind of simultaneously went through this process of all of your social life is happening digitally. And there was a window of opportunity there where I was having so much fun on Zoom, forging really meaningful connections and, like, lifelong friendships. And it really increased my sense of what's possible in the digital arena. The kind of friendships that we've built both on Zoom and on Twitter for me, and people have got other places that they're also having their, like, really profound connections. So that, just kind of blew my mind about what's possible in the digital environment. But since then, it was like I say, we were all sort of doing it at once, and now it feels like we're back to the way things used to be, which is everyone's in a different reality, everyone's in a different context, and there's less shared understanding about what your reality looks like compared to mine. And so I've gotten a little bit more pessimistic, I guess, about the digital space. It's like, oh, it's some people are really exhausted with it. You know, it's not like this exciting new field that we're all entering together. And yeah, people are showing up in different ways, and so it feels like there's kind of less coherence or there's less harmony there. So I'm a little bit like I say, a little bit more pessimistic, a little bit more sanguine about what's possible. And yeah, we're just, like I said, taking over this house, and I'm really excited about what we can do in physical space. And it's some things are so straightforward when you're in the room together, you know, like when I'm in the room with my friends and colleagues here, it's easy for them to tell how much capacity I have. Whereas when you're sending me digital messages on WhatsApp and on emails and things, you have got no idea about how much capacity I have. So you just send your thing, and there's no way of sort of, you're not getting any feedback to say, whoa, 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 this dude is really overloaded, back off. Whereas we're in the room, that's just a tiny example of like a million information signals that we can send to each other when we're in the same space, that just give you all of this extra ability to coordinate with a level of finesse and nuance that the digital can't replicate yet.
Maybe, I'm just thinking maybe one day they'll have the WhatsApp like biometric status update just to give the automatic read on what is the state of the person you're messaging.
Yeah, I would like to have a thing that's just sort of notices like, hey, Rich is temporarily open and excited about hearing from people. Now's the time. And the rest of the time, leave him alone. And so, like I say, if you ask me again in 6 months, I think I'll flip the thing and I would say, oh, it's so limited doing things in person, and digital's amazing. You've got all this ability to connect and pull experts from everywhere and find solidarity where you've previously had isolation. So, you know, but I think both options are amazing, and I'm just personally excited about being in the room where I can smell my friends again.
And I think hybrid works really well as well. If you're bringing people together, like recently we just participated in an in-person conference, and there was the online space for the lead up, which kind of allowed people to create connection and relationship before. And then during the conference, people could also send messages and stuff like that to coordinate things in the background, like for example, travel to the space and such. And then post conference, just sharing information and so on. And I really feel like a big thing, it really depends on the context a lot as well, especially if you're doing any kind of deeper transformational work, then a lot of that value of that is in the integration. And so I think there's an argument for the hybrid model that that really takes advantage of the best of both worlds.
Absolutely. And I think all of us as practitioners are getting more refined in our understanding of what you can do with each space, and have them play to their strength. So it's not just digital and face-to-face, it's also synchronous and asynchronous. So like with all of our courses, well, 90% of our courses now, and our retreats, any content is delivered asynchronously. It's like, here's a bunch of videos and reading material and stuff that you can do on your own, in your own time. If you want to go deep, you can go deep. If you want to just skim across the surface, you can. And we're not going to spend, when we have our precious time together, whether that's online or in person, but when we're synchronized, when we've put that moment in your calendar where we're all paying attention, we're not just going to listen to one guy talk for half an hour. Like, that's just not the most efficient use of our time. Like, that's going to happen elsewhere. While we've got people's coordinated attention, we're going to use it for participating in lots and lots, like I keep saying about these small group encounters. That's just like a much more efficient use of time. Unless you've got like an exquisitely crafted presentation that's really gone through a lot of iterations to get to a level of polish, it's very unlikely that one person addressing 30 is going to be more valuable than 30 people talking to each other in small groups. And then, like you say about the integration, absolutely. For me, getting people together for a few days, set the conditions for a peak experience. Okay, that's easy. And then the follow-up process afterwards of how that alternate reality that we inhabited while we're off on retreat together, how to integrate that into your day-to-day life. For me, the most reliable method I know is, again, small groups with rhythmic encounter. So like the 3 people that I had the most significant connections with at that retreat, I'm going to meet with them once a week for the next 8 weeks. And if I can maintain that rhythm, maintain that connection while I'm like coming back into my daily reality, it's much more likely that you're going to get that integration, that like the coming together of the 2 worlds, my everyday world and my like altered consciousness that I got to enjoy at the retreat. They're going to go and come together. And that's, yeah, the most reliable sort of mechanism that I've found so far for integration is, yeah, you need that, like that's happening in the digital layer again, right? Because most people can't afford to spend 8 weeks together at the retreat center. They've got to go back and go back to their jobs.
Rich, thank you so much for making time for this conversation. I really appreciate the richness and the nuances, because again, for me, so much the heart of this work is about groups and the way they come together and everything that comes out of that process. And I feel like that's many people that are designing courses are also building community, and many communities are basically a version of a learning experience. So I feel like there's this rich overlap that we got to explore today, and really appreciate your reflections.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun for me too. It's good exploring with you.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch.